I find it difficult to believe the miracles described in the Bible, like Jesus walking on water or rising from the dead. How can we be sure these events really happened?
Dig into the resurrection of Christ. It is a historic truth claim. This supposedly happened.
Why didn't God create a world without the possibility of sin, suffering, evil, and death?
I giggle to myself this question because...
This week on the Reach Podcast. Well, hey everybody, we are back. It's week number 3 of our little mini-series here. Questions from the field. These are questions that I asked our staff on Search Ministries to send on in, questions that they got recently from people they're talking to all over the country. And we're going to give you a quick little answer, just thinking through how would we answer these questions if we were in a conversation. We just had a minute or two to talk them through. So joining me back for the 3rd week in a row is Scott Davis, Dr. Mel Cure, and we're just going to jump right in and start it off. So Mel, I'm going to throw this first one to you. And I'll say at the outset, this is one of the more difficult questions probably the most difficult question to answer, particularly hard when you don't have a lot of time. But nonetheless, we get this question a lot. And so I'm sure you've had to answer this a lot. So it comes in different forms. Here's how this person asked it. I can understand God allowing hardships to fulfill a greater purpose, but are horrific, sadistic experiences really necessary? Doesn't that contradict the idea of a loving and compassionate God?
Wow. I always need to start with, I'm not God myself. I can't fully defend or tell you exactly what his response to this question might be. Just like if I was trying to explain things that my dad did when I was young, some of those I still don't fully understand. But as I sit here today, I'm thankful for everything he did, even the parts I didn't fully understand. So I'd start with that. I would also say that there's a presupposition, it sounds like, under the question, which is ultimately that God is responsible for everything that happens, or at least culpable. And I think for him to be culpable, there has to be some sense of direct responsibility. Theologically, that's a little imprecise. I mean, God has both a prescriptive will, that which he does, and a permissive will, that which he allows us to do in our freedom. So there's a whole lot of theology in that. I certainly don't think he would ever choose to do anything barbaric or ravenous. Flip that around, I think that probably the most barbaric and terrible thing ever was what his own son went through for us. Mm-hmm. And that was not proof of a negative about God's character, but the ultimate positive, that he loved us so very much that he would allow his son to go through that for us.
Yeah, and maybe just to use a more common word, but there's things that God allows versus cause. And the one thing we would want to encourage anybody answering this question to not do is attribute evil to God.
Amen.
God never does anything bad ever, but he does allow bad things to happen. I think that's really where the challenge is. So
Sure.
If he's powerful though, and he's good, then why wouldn't he stop such and such from... I just came from a funeral of a friend who was 25 years old and killed in a car wreck, had everything going for him. And I was asking this question, and even though I kind of know some of the answers, I mean, this is so hard, and there's so much tragedy that makes no sense to us this side of heaven, that at least from my perspective, one of the things we've got to do a good job as Christians of in these situations is saying we don't know. Mm-hmm. Anything come to mind for you, Scott?
Yeah, for sure. And especially if you've got a friend or a family member who has something really horrific happen, there's a emotional response. Hey, I'm so sorry. And maybe that's your response for their first week or the first month or their first year of just being there, grabbing coffee or lunch with them, putting your arm around them, and just being there for them. But then there's that intellectual response when they're ready to hear it, possibly. And I don't know when that is. The Holy Spirit will let you know. But I love to ask the question, because this is the question, the pain and suffering question. I like to ask the question, well, does God care? Do you think God cares about your predicament? And Mel, going back to what you said earlier, I think God answers it in all caps, bold, italic, the biggest font you can find. Absolutely yes. And allowing He sent His Son Jesus to leave the throne of heaven, to come down, to live amongst us, and to die this brutal death to pay for the sins of the world and my sin, so that by His death and resurrection, by believing that He took my place, that I have heaven for Him. And actually, if He rose again from the dead, He says He's coming back. And then when He comes back in Revelation, He says, hey, new heaven, new earth, no more sin, no more death, no more tears, that He can make that claim. And but I love asking the question, do you think God cares?
Yeah. Pro tip real quick on that, because this does come up. I mean, those of us that do search realize that this problem of evil and suffering, the problem of exclusivity, there's 3 or 4 of these that definitely come up all the time. So you're going to hear it. A great pro tip is look for the question behind the question. You know, why are they asking? Because if it is truly an emotional thing, if they literally did just come from a funeral or have a friend in the hospital, or, you know, somehow we're tied to some atrocity that happened in another part of the world that's just now in the news, the very worst thing you can do is start offering a bunch of intellectual responses to that. So question behind the question is a good place to start.
Great pro tip. Okay, question number 2. Scott, why didn't God create a world without the possibility of sin, suffering, evil, and death? / this is my addendum, another version of this question. He is going to do that in the future, according to our viewpoint. So why didn't you just start it that way? Why do we have to go through all this?
I giggle to myself this question, because the scriptures say, who really knows the mind of God? Like if your God, your friend is talking to you, if your God is knowable as far as our intellects are actually the same plane, I would like, that God isn't very big. I look at God made Himself known through, nature, creation, and through morality. There's going to be things, in fact, many beyond infinite number of things that I'm not going to understand. It's almost like, I remember when I was teaching high school math, and we had the Apple IIe computer, and we had the little floppy disk you'd put in, and now we have the cloud, and it'd be like me and my Apple IIe computer trying to connect to the cloud. It's like there's no way I'm going to connect to the cloud, and so. But it kind of makes me giggle. But I would just throw it back to the person asking the question. So, what's your view of God? What do you think about that? Because how do you know? And hopefully that will lead to some more conversation.
Hey everybody, I wanted to take a moment and let you know that the Reach podcast is brought to you by Search, a ministry dedicated to sharing Jesus through friendships and conversations for nearly 50 years. Learn more or get involved at searchnational.org. Yeah, I think that's a really wise answer, because it's true.
Surprisingly, yes.
Not surprisingly at all. Mel, anything in addition to that?
Scott summarized that beautifully. Go.
Okay, I'm going to throw you question number 3. I find it difficult to believe the miracles described in the Bible, like Jesus walking on water or rising from the dead. How can we be sure these events really happened?
Investigate the resurrection. If Christ be not raised, our faith is in vain, and we're to be pitied above all men. I mean, there's the silver bullet that shoots Christianity right out of the water. I encourage anyone that really genuinely, and again, go back to the question behind this question, if that's genuinely an innocent person's question, one that's not trying to avoid and be bait and switch here, but genuinely is struggling with that idea of the miraculous, dig into the resurrection of Christ. It is a historic truth claim. This supposedly happened. You can go investigate it, just like you investigate whether Washington crossed the Delaware or any other historic fact. Go do it. If you will, you'll probably end up writing a book like Who Moved the Stone, which would be one I'd encourage you to look up. Written back in the 50s, in the 1950s, by a guy under a pseudonym named Frank Morrison. The first chapter of the book is called The Book That Refused to Be Written. He set out to disprove the resurrection and converted to Christ as a result of his own investigation. Modern version of that, The Case for Christ, Lee Strobel. Evidence That Demands a Verdict, Josh McDowell. There's book after book. The Resurrection of the Christ, N.T. Wright, probably the ultimate volume investigation on this one miracle. It's the miracle of all miracles. If he did, he did. And if he did that, he could do all this other stuff.
What are a few of the most convincing evidences for you two that the resurrection actually happened? And maybe I'll throw it to Scott first.
Yeah, I look at the effect of his followers. You know, his disciples went scurrying when he got arrested. John hung around there at the cross when he was crucified. But to see the risen Jesus turn these ordinary men who were hiding and locked doors because they thought they were going to be next, and all of a sudden now they're empowered, and they go down. And it's 2,000 years later, and we're still talking about this dead Jew over 2,000 years ago. These ordinary men, because they'd seen the risen Jesus. Mm-hmm. So I think the effect of his followers is one of my major themes, as well as his mother Mary. I mean, if Christmas really happened, if the virgin birth really happened, I can't imagine any mother being at the foot of the cross and not yelling out, "Hey, it was the milkman, no, bring him down." But no, Mary sat there and wept and saw him die from this world. And so those are two of the things I go to.
And see, I think there's a lot of things for me, but the guys I deal with, a lot of people that maybe are not as conversant with Christian stuff, the amount of extra biblical attestation to the historicity of the person of Jesus, the acts of Jesus, the historicity of Jesus. I mean, it's agreed now among skeptical scholars that this is history we're dealing with. Dig in there first. We're not just talking Bible stuff here. That to me has been most compelling to my friends that are investigating this.
Yep, really, really good. And I would encourage you, go check out the resources that Mel was talking about. There's a ton of great stuff out there all talking about that. And if the resurrection happened, then all the other miracle stories in the Bible are no big deal. Or the way we say it sometimes in Search, right? We go back to the does God exist question. Yep. But if there's a God that acts, then acts of God are possible. Sure. Or another way of saying, if God made the whole universe, by the way, I don't know if you've looked at the sky recently or gone out to the country and seen the Milky Way. My son just got a telescope, so I'm thinking, but it's mind-blowing what's going on in outer space. If there's a God that made everything, then he can probably do some of the little miracles that are in the Bible.
Amen.
No big deal.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay. Last question, Scott. And this one comes up a lot. What about people in remote areas who will never hear the gospel? Are they automatically excluded from heaven through no fault of their own?
Yeah, that question is raised up a lot. And the fact that they're asking that question means that they understand the gospel. And so, two things come to my mind. First of all, let's suppose they are held responsible. Well, that doesn't seem like the God that we read in the Bible. God is fair and just. And so that's kind of bad luck, you're out. So another thing I would think about, well, if that's the case, well, don't go tell anybody then. Just leave them alone in their simplicity and their lack of knowledge, and so they'll be saved. But that goes against what Jesus told us in the Great Commission, go and make disciples of all nations. And so I believe that God has made himself known, and we've talked about it in other previous episodes, but in Romans, it talks about he made himself known through creation, through nature, and through morality, through right and wrong. And so he has made himself known. And if you have any friends that are in the missionary field, especially overseas, God can come. If there's a guy who can act, and acts of God are possible, like you said in the previous question, But Jesus does come to many, many people in dreams. There's a great website called godreports.com. And these are actually documented stories of Muslims who have met Jesus in dreams and have come to faith through that. So, and then now you look at the smartphone that we have, and then we can get the Bible on our smartphone a lot of times in our own native language. And so who would have dreamed that we'd have access to the Bible like we do? So I believe there's some great questions when it goes to that, but I believe there's some answers there as well.
Yeah. Mel?
Yeah,
Anything?
I think the reason we need to go to Romans on this is because in the question, often when I hear it, there's an assumption that there's some group out there, some people group, either some hidden. I just read yesterday that there is an unreached people group out there, and a guy got arrested for trying to swim onto this island to make contact with them, and literally he's arrested because they would endanger the life of everybody in this tribe if they get exposed to the bacteria and stuff. Anyway, so the point is, yes, there still are people out there that may not have heard. That's true. So, but the point of the scriptures is, the point of Romans 1 is, God will never let us flunk a test we don't know we're taking. Mm-hmm. Okay? So if we don't know, that's not a question on his test. The question on the test, and according to Romans 1, is, have you witnessed God's eternal power and his divine nature? Because they're supposedly clearly seen through what has been made, so that we are without excuse that there is a God who is good. If there's a God who's good and you seek him according to the rest of the scriptures, you'll find him. Either a dream will come, a missionary will show up, or a podcast that you're watching right now will speak that to you. So you got to respond to the revelation you've been given, and that's all we get judged for.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point. And there's a couple of things I'd throw out here too, and maybe get y'all's thoughts on this. But even in this question, so it says, are they automatically excluded from heaven through no fault of their own? And back to Romans, although it's
there too,
yeah, but it's all over the Bible. But Romans is a great one, 5 and 6. People are not born with no fault of their own.
Very good.
Now, maybe the no fault they mean is the geography where they were born, maybe. But a lot of times people have this assumption that just people are running around out here totally, completely innocent, and we're not. We inherit a depraved nature, and then we act on it. And so we're guilty doubly, really, and it's not fun to talk about, but that's the whole problem that Jesus came to solve. And so if we don't start with an understanding of human nature that's correct, then it really gets you to bad stuff down the road. So that's one thing that just stood out from the question, I could say. But then the second thing that comes to my mind would be, people aren't excluded from heaven because they, didn't hear the gospel.
Correct.
They're excluded because of their sin.
Mm-hmm.
And their choice to reject God.
Yeah.
That God that's visible every sunset.
Regardless of whether you've heard the gospel or not. So it's not like, you're excluded because you didn't hear it. Oh, sorry for you didn't hear it. If only you would have heard it. No, it's, you've got a problem, which is sin and your rejection of God, however he's revealed himself to you. But he's been revealed to everybody, as Mel said, in one way or another. And what do you do with that? And then the only thing I would add to that is the what do you do with the revelation?
Right.
Totally way beyond this podcast. Different versions of grace. How does grace work? How far does it take you? A little bit, all the way, all that kind of stuff. Other podcasts for that. But
back to an earlier edition of this, you'll find what you look for.
Yeah.
If you seek him, you'll find him. He'll come looking for you.
Yeah. So, great stuff, guys. We got kind of deep on the last one a little bit.
You bring it out in us, Blaine.
But that's a hard question. So anyway, Mel, thank you for being here. Scott, thank you for being here. And thank you for watching the last few weeks. I hope it's been helpful, and we'll see you next week. Thanks for listening to the Reach Podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, subscribe so you don't miss the next one. That'd be a good idea. Share it with a friend and leave us a review to help others find the podcast. Now, for more resources, please visit reachothers.org and follow us on Facebook and Instagram, and we'd love to hear from you.